elevator came. She stepped in, and as the doors closed, she faced forward, and the smile that crossed her face was private and slow, and had very little to do with the deposition. She had a plan. The boardroom of Voss and Associates was designed to make people feel the weight of what they were doing there. Not oppressively. Talon was too precise for oppression, which was a blunt instrument. But the long table of dark glass, the leather chairs, the uninterrupted view of the city from three sides, all of it said, quietly but without apology. She was standing at the window when Lara arrived, and she turned and looked at him with the measured, professional warmth she had calibrated over years. And he looked back at her with everything he'd said the night before still sitting plainly in his face. And she gave him a single small nod that said, later, not now. Hold it. He sat, she sat. They waited. At 9:12, the boardroom door opened. Clarence Singer came in first. Talon had known him for 11 years, had learned half of what she knew about courtroom positioning from watching him work at Bennett and Sugar before she outgrew the place and built something better. He was silver-haired and immaculate, and wore his authority the way good suits are worn, like it had always been there. Talon. He extended a hand, and she shook it. Clarence. She smiled. It's been too long. Longer for some of us than others, he said, with the dry warmth of a man acknowledging that he was sitting on the wrong side of the table. And then Vanessa walked in. Talon had built a portrait of this woman over weeks, had assembled her from financial filings and late-night conversations, and the particular quality of pain she had watched move through Lara's face every time her name came up. She had expected someone hard, someone whose surfaces were deliberately impenetrable, whose presentation announced the terms of engagement before the word was spoken. What she had not expected was this: Vanessa Metropolis was contained in the way of someone who has never needed to perform strength, because the real version has always been sufficient. She wore dark trousers and a simple cashmere top, no jewelry that announced itself, no armor of color or label. Her hair was pulled back cleanly. Her face was composed in the manner of a woman who had decided at some prior point how much of herself the room was going to receive, and had given it precisely that, and not a fraction more. She did not look at Talon when she entered. She did not look at Clarence, or the table, or the view. She pulled out her chair and sat, and looked across the table at Lara, not with anger. Talon searched her expression for the cold calculation she had been expecting, for the venom of a woman caught, for guilt or performance, or the barely contained aggression of the cornered. She found none of it. Vanessa looked at Lara the way you look at something you have already grieved. The proceedings began. Documents moved across the table. Clarence and Talon built their respective structures with a practiced, slightly adversarial courtesy of two people who respected each other enough to be genuinely difficult, and the language of the law picked apart a life the way legal language does, precisely, without sentiment, assigning dollar values to the years, the apartment, the investment accounts, the joint property in Marin County. Each item extracted from the life they had built together and placed on one side of a line or the other. And the brutality of it was not in the conflict, but in the absence of it, in the way two people's accumulated choices could be reduced to columns and schedules, and the clean, cold arithmetic of what had been shared and what had always quietly been kept separate. Talon kept working, but she kept looking at Vanessa. She was searching with the same focused attention she brought to financial filings and deposition transcripts, for the woman Lara had described, the manipulation, the cruelty dressed as kindness, the architecture of a person designed to take. She found a woman who was very still and very composed, and watching the proceedings with the focused disengagement of someone sitting through the formal conclusion of a decision already made privately long ago. What Talon could not find, and noted without knowing what to do with the noting, was surprise. Vanessa glanced at Lara, then at Talon, then at the two of them together. Something in the geometry of them, the particular proximity of their chairs, the way Talon had touched Lara's forearm once, briefly, when a document needed his attention. Vanessa's brow contracted just slightly, just once, and she looked down at the table, and then she tapped Clarence on the arm. He leaned in. She spoke into his ear, close and brief, and Talon watched Clarence's expression move through a sequence of controlled reactions, the last of which was the particular stillness of a senior attorney who has been given unexpected instructions and is deciding how to execute them with dignity. He raised his head. "My client," he said, with commendable evenness, "is prepared to accept the current terms as presented." The room absorbed this. Talon did not allow herself the victory of a visible reaction. She reached for her documents with the smooth efficiency of someone who had prepared for exactly this moment, drew the settlement agreement from the folder, clean, complete, every figure and condition already in order, and slid it across the glass table in a single, unhurried movement. Clarence pulled it toward him and began to read. Vanessa took it from his hands. She read it for less than 30 seconds. Then she picked up the pen on the table in front of her. Talon's pen, a fine black thing left there by habit, and signed it. One signature, clean and absolute. The signature of a woman who had made up her mind some considerable time ago, and was only now making it legible to the room. She stood She straightened her cashmere. She looked at no one in particular, except the middle distance of her own decision. And then she moved toward the door. And as she passed the length of the table, she said it quietly, directed at the floor or the air, or the particular frequency on which Lara could hear it. Lara, a pause, the briefest pause, the pause of a woman making a last and final point. You're so consuming. The door closed behind her. Clarence gathered his papers with the measured pace of a man preserving his dignity in defeat. He paused at Talon's shoulder on his way out. As good as ever, he said quietly. Better, she said. He almost smiled, and then he was gone. The room was quiet. The city gleamed through the glass, indifferent and enormous, and entirely beautiful. The signed settlement agreement sat on the dark table between them, like something that had taken a very long time to arrive. Talon looked at it. Then she looked at Lara, at his face. In this moment, carrying everything at once. The release, the grief, the particular complex silence of a man who had just watched 6 years of his life be settled in 30 seconds by a woman who signed with a borrowed pen and left without looking back. He exhaled, long and slow, the exaltation of something finally put down. Talon said nothing. Some victories didn't need words. Some rooms needed to be allowed to hold what they held for just a moment before the next thing began. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. The calls started the evening of the settlement. She was in her apartment, still in her work clothes, shoes off, feet tucked beneath her on the couch, with a glass of wine she had poured and forgotten to drink, when her phone lit up with his name. She answered on the second ring, which was one ring faster than she'd intended. Tell me something, he said, without preamble. Good evening to you too. good evening. A pause, and she could hear the smile in it. Now tell me something, anything. I just want to hear you talk. She looked at the ceiling. I'm billing you for this call. Add it to my tab. You don't have a tab. You have an invoice, which is a different thing entirely. Then add it to my invoice. It's already been paid. Then I'm a free man, he said, in every sense of the word, which means I can call you at 9:15 in the evening and ask you to tell me something, and there are no longer any professional objections. She smiled at the ceiling. She didn't try to stop it. There was no one there to see it. How do you feel? She asked. The silence on the other end was thoughtful rather than empty. Like I've been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, he said slowly, and I've just set it down. And my arms are still in the shape of the carrying, but they're empty. He paused. Does that make sense? More than you know, she said. The weeks that followed had a quality she didn't have a word for, and wasn't sure she wanted to name, in case naming it made it fragile. He called in the evenings. She called back when she missed his call, which was more often than her professional self endorsed. They talked the way they had been talking since the hotel, easily, openly, with the specific intimacy of two people who have run out of reasons to be careful with each other, and discovered that the honesty underneath is not frightening, but the opposite of frightening. He sent her a photograph one morning, a coffee cup on a windowsill, the grey Seattle skyline behind it, and beneath it the message, this view would be better with better company. She stared at it for longer than she intended. Then she typed, "You have very poor taste in views," and put her phone face down on her desk, and spent the next 20 minutes not thinking about it. He arrived at Augusto's on a Wednesday before she did. which had never happened before, and when she walked in, he was already at the corner table with 2 coffees and a look of quiet satisfaction at having managed to be early for something. "You were waiting," she said. "I was early," he said. "There's a distinction, a semantic one, an important one." He pushed her coffee toward her. "I have been early for nothing in my life." This felt like the right occasion to start. She sat down. Outside, Seattle did what Seattle does. Wrapped itself in grey and drizzle, and the particular atmospheric melancholy that she had always secretly found beautiful, the way she found most beautiful things, from a slight distance, from behind glass, with something warm in her hands. He was watching her the way he watched her sometimes, openly, without apology, the way a person looks at something they have decided they are allowed to look at. "Stop that," she said. "Stop what?" "Looking at me like that in public." "Like what?" She gave him the look that made first associates reconsider their life choices. He received it with complete equanimity and took a sip of his coffee. And she thought, not for the first time, that this was a man who was genuinely unbothered by her in the most pleasing possible way. They walked after coffee down along the waterfront, collars up against the cold. She talked about the cases she was rebuilding after the weeks she had poured into his, and he talked about the asset transfers beginning to move through the legal machinery, the slow, grinding bureaucracy of a life being officially divided and redistributed. He was thoughtful about it, not bitter. She had braced for bitterness and found instead a kind of philosophical steadiness, the equanimity of a man who has decided that the past is a closed structure and he is no longer responsible for its maintenance. "The Marin property will take the longest," he said. "Joint title means both signatures, and Vanessa's attorney is being precise about the timeline. But it'll move, and the shipping company assets, not my concern, he said, without weight. Never was, really. She looked at him sideways. You're remarkably calm about all of it. I'm remarkably happy about something else entirely, he said. It tends to put the rest in perspective. She looked away, toward the water. She was smiling again. She seemed to be doing that with unreasonable frequency lately, and she noticed that she was no longer particularly motivated to stop. On a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after the settlement, she was at her desk, genuinely working, for the first time in months, with the full, undivided attention of a woman who had no other case consuming her from the inside out. When Yasmin's voice came through the intercom, Miss Voss, there's a Mr. Agatha in reception. She looked at her screen, then at the door. Send him through, she said. He appeared in her doorway, looking like a different person. Not different in feature or bearing. Those were constant, it turned out. But different in energy, in the quality of light he was carrying. The shadows that had sat behind his eyes the first evening he had stood in her reception were gone, or mostly gone, the way storms leave a sky, their absence altering the whole quality of the atmosphere. He was wearing a jacket she hadn't seen before, something soft and well cut, and he was looking at her with the open, easy warmth of a man who has nothing to negotiate and knows it. I wasn't expecting you, she said. I know. I was expecting you anyway. He stopped. How? I know you, she said simply, and left it there, because the rest of it, the way she had known all week that this particular week was the one, that the paperwork had reached its final stage, and that Lara Agatha would not wait a single unnecessary day, was not something she felt like explaining. Some things were allowed to simply be true without being examined. He came into the office and stood across her desk with his hands in his pockets, and she leaned back in her chair and looked up at him, and the dynamic of it, him standing, her seated, the great walnut desk between them, struck her briefly, perfectly emblematic of everything they had been to each other, and everything they were rearranging. "I want to take you somewhere," he said. "Do you?" "To celebrate." He tilted his head slightly. "You and me. A few days. No files, no notepads, no depositions. No." He gestured at the room. "Architecture of professional consequence." She folded her hands on the desk. "I have a backlog of cases I neglected for 3 weeks while you were saving my life," he said. "While I was doing my job." "Talon." "Lara." He leaned forward slightly, both hands finding the edge of her desk, and looked at her with the calm, unhurried certainty of a man who has already decided how this conversation ends. "You deserve a break. You deserve more than a break. And this one," he held her gaze, "this one counts more than any other you have ever taken or will ever take. I need you to know that." She looked at him. She had been wanted before. She was not naive about that. She had been pursued and flattered and desired in the various ways that successful, striking women are pursued and flattered and desired. And she had received all of it with the equable detachment of someone who could see the machinery underneath and was not moved by machinery. But she had not. In all of those years, had a man stand in front of her with a plan, with the specific, purposeful confidence of someone who knew not only what he wanted, but how to arrive at it, and had done the preparation and was here now, offering it with both hands open. It was, she discovered, a completely different thing. Leavenworth, he said. She blinked. The town. A cottage. 4 days. Trees. Mountains. Very good wine. And no one who knows either of our names. He paused. I have already booked it. She opened her mouth. You said, he continued, with the quiet precision of a man playing a card he has been holding for some time, that you would wait until the divorce was final. You said that. He straightened. It's final, Talon. Every document, every signature, it's done. You have no excuse left. She looked at him for a long, full moment. He was just standing there in her office, in his good jacket, with his soft eyes and his open hands, offering her something she had been telling herself she didn't need for such a long time. I have a backlog, she said, for the last time. Delegate it, he said. You have good people. She uncrossed her legs, stood, walked around the desk, and stood close enough to look up at him properly. And she held his gaze, and she thought about the next chapter of her life, and what she wanted it to look like. And she said, fine. His smile was slow and complete, and entirely worth it. There is, he added, with the slightly careful tone of a man raising a thing he has timed deliberately. One small detail about the trip. She narrowed her eyes. My finances are in transit, he said. The asset transfers won't clear for a few months yet. Everything is technically in holding until the settlement is finally executed. He met her eyes with the particular expression of a man who is aware of the comedy of his own situation and has decided to meet it with grace. So you would need to cover the trip, she said. I'm obviously good for it. She looked at him, and then something broke open in her face that she had not planned. A laugh, a real one, rising from somewhere entirely undefended. 15 years, she said, shaking her head. 15 years, and you are still making me pay. He was trying not to smile and failing beautifully. Last time, he said, I promise you, the absolute last time. That's what you said about the first date. I was 22 and had a cash flow situation. You have a cash flow situation right now. A temporary and entirely documented one. He reached out and took her hand and folded it inside both of his and looked at her with all the comedy gone and only the truth remaining. Last time, he said again, quietly, absolutely. I promise. She looked at their hands, then at him. You try to kiss me in this office, she said, and I will invoice you for the emotional disruption. He leaned in anyway. She let him. And when Lawrence walked past the open door a moment later and performed the small miracle of a junior associate who has seen nothing and kept walking, she stepped back and pressed her fingers briefly to her lips and said with tremendous composure, "The staff are going to talk. Let them," he said easily, picking up his jacket from the chair. "They'll be seeing a great deal of me from now on. They may as well start adjusting." The days before the trip had a quality she recognized from nowhere in her adult life and traced eventually to something much older. The specific, luminous anticipation of being on the edge of something that was going to change everything, and knowing it, and not being afraid. She was afraid a little, but underneath the fear was something larger and steadier, and she had learned over 38 years of trusting the structures she built to put her weight on the thing underneath. She packed on a Friday evening with uncharacteristic uncertainty, standing in front of her wardrobe for long, unproductive minutes, holding things and putting them back. She had negotiated multi-million-dollar asset divisions without breaking a sweat, and she was undone by a weekend bag. She found this both humiliating and reluctantly wonderful. He drove. She had not expected that, had assumed vaguely logistics of some kind, but he appeared at her building on Saturday morning with a rental car and the easy, proprietary confidence of a man entirely comfortable behind a wheel. And she put her bag in the back and got in, and they left Seattle behind them in the grey morning light. The drive east through the Cascades was the kind of beautiful that makes conversation unnecessary. The mountains came up around them slowly. First, the suggestion of them in the distance, then the reality, enormous and unhurried, draped in the dark green of fir and pine, and the first silver dusting of early snow at the peaks. The highway wound through passes where the rock faces rose close on both sides, and the sky appeared in strips between them, pale and immense. She watched it and said very little, and felt something in her chest slowly, incrementally release. He drove the way he did everything, without urgency, with the specific quality of attention that made the thing he was doing feel like the only thing worth doing. He played music she half knew and occasionally hummed to without apparent self-consciousness. He reached across once and covered her hand on the console, and when she turned to look at him, he was watching the road with a small, private smile. and she thought, this is what it looks like. This specific thing. This is what I have been building all these years toward without knowing it. Leavenworth arrived like something from a story. The Bavarian facades, the window boxes still holding the last of the season's colour, the mountains folded close around the valley, as if the town had been placed there by someone who understood the value of being held. The cottage was at the edge of the village, set back among pines, its windows warm with lamplight in the late afternoon grey. She stood outside it for a moment, her bag at her feet, looking up at it. Well, he said. It'll do, she said. The days were the closest thing to silence she had experienced in years. Not the silence of her apartment, which was the silence of space designed for one and fully adapted to it, but the other kind, the silence that only exists between two people who have run out of anything to perform for each other and discovered that what remains is not absence but presence, full and sufficient, and asking nothing. They cooked badly and ate well. They walked in the mornings through the pine-cold air, his hand folding hers without discussion. They sat by the fire in the evenings with wine and talked until one of them fell asleep mid-sentence, and then the other covered them and let them sleep. She read, he sketched. Structural things, she discovered, looking over his shoulder. Bridges, load-bearing calculations for nothing in particular. The practiced doodling of a man whose mind moved in acres and spans, even at rest. She found it inordinately endearing and kept that entirely to herself. The third evening, they walked back from dinner at a nearby restaurant along a road lined with bare trees whose branches crossed overhead against the dark, and their breath made small clouds in the cold air. And The dinner had been candlelit and slow, and the wine had been very good, and she was thinking about nothing more than the particular quality of this specific moment. When they reached the cottage and he opened the door before her, she stepped inside, turned back to check he had followed. He was on one knee on the threshold. The cold light from outside was behind him, and he was looking up at her with an expression she had no prior reference for. Not the romance of performance, not the drama of a gesture designed to produce a particular response, but something stripped entirely of theatre. A man in a doorway of a cottage in the mountains, on his knee, looking at the woman he was looking at, with every single thing he felt completely visible on his face. I want to tell you what I know, he said. His voice was quiet and even. I know that the universe is largely indifferent. I know that we are small, and that most of what happens to us happens without design or intention. I believe this, he said, and I also know that you and I have been finding our way back to this doorway for 15 years, and I do not know how to call that indifference. I have tried. I cannot do it. She hadn't moved. She was aware of her own breathing. I know what I wasted, he said. I know the years, and I know what they cost. And there is not a single day of them I would not trade to have stood here sooner. But I am here now. We are both here now, and I am asking you. His voice dropped further to something that lived below ceremony, below language almost, in the place where the truest things are kept. To let this be the rest of our lives. The ordinary Tuesday mornings and the difficult evenings and the long drives and the bad cooking and all of it, all of the ordinary, extraordinary everything with me. She had meant to say something measured, something that acknowledged the beauty of the moment while maintaining the characteristic composure of a woman who did not, as a rule, make her most significant decisions on cottage doorsteps in the mountains. Yes, she whispered. Just that. The word left her before the rest of her had assembled a position on it, and she discovered in the moment after it was gone that it had been waiting there for a very long time and was simply relieved to finally have been said. He stood, and the rest of the night was theirs. The warmth of the cottage and the quiet of the mountains outside, and the specific, irreplaceable closeness of two people who have finally, after a very long time and a great deal of distance, arrived at the same place at the same time and understood that they are not leaving. They had shared nights before in the cottage already, in the warmth of the days just past, and years ago, briefly, in that other life. She knew the landscape of him in the way you know things you have not visited in a long time, but your body has not forgotten. But this was different. This was the first time there was nothing held back. No case, no professional distance, no careful management of what she allowed herself to feel and how much of it she let show. No armor, no arrangement, just Talon, not Miss Voss, not the attorney, just Talon in the warmth of the lamplight, with the man she had loved since she was 23, and had never fully stopped. It felt like the first time. It was